Imagine this scenario for a second. How does a biotech giant report a massive 19% jump in quarterly revenue, hitting like $3.6 billion, while simultaneously fighting off these intense competitive threats, dealing with a sudden factory shutdown in Ireland, and, oh yeah, agreeing to give away a brand new, groundbreaking gene therapy for absolutely free?
Right. I mean, it sounds like three completely different companies, or at least a highly contradictory strategy. You just don't typically see record-breaking revenue reported in the very same breath as factory interruptions and like free product giveaways.
It's a fascinating contradiction, and that is exactly our mission for today. We are decoding Regeneron Pharmaceuticals Q1 2026 financial and operating results. We've got their official Form 10Q and their earnings press release right here, and we're going to, extract the aha moments hidden in all this dense financial data, break down their clinical pipeline, and look closely at some truly unprecedented government negotiations.
Yeah, we are really looking for the underlying mechanics today, not just what the numbers are, but why they look the way they do. I mean, this is a master class in how a company navigates a highly complex, fragile, global landscape while trying to basically reinvent its core business at the same time.
Okay, let's unpack this because the top level financials are just staggering. A 19% growth compared to Q1 of 2025 brings their total revenues to $3.605 billion. But before we get swept up in the top line, I want to look at the bottom line because the filings actually present two different pictures. They reported a GAAP net income and then a non-GAAP net income of $9.47 per share. Let's pause for the listener here. What exactly is the difference between GAAP and non-GAAP, and, well, why should we care?
So that is a crucial distinction when you're reading any financial filing. GAAP stands for Generally Accepted Accounting Principles. It's the standardized rule book every public company has to follow. But sometimes standard rules don't tell the whole story of how the actual business is running day to day.
Right, because of weird one-off expenses.
Exactly. Non-GAAP strips out that one-time accounting noise, like an unexpected factory repair, which we'll definitely get to later, or stock-based compensation, just to show you the true underlying health of the operating engine. In this case, that non-GAAP number rose 15%. So the underlying engine is incredibly healthy.
And a massive part of that engine's output is going right back into the fuel tank. I mean, they poured $1.54 billion into research and development in just one quarter. That is almost half of their revenue going straight back into the lab.
It's huge. And it tells you they're deeply aware that their survival relies entirely on scientific innovation. The pharmaceutical industry is it's unforgiving. If you aren't inventing the next blockbuster, well, your competitors definitely will. And a primary driver funding all that R&D right now is Dupixent. Global net sales for Dupixent surged by 33%, hitting $4.88 billion.
Wait, just to clarify the mechanics there, those global sales are actually recorded by their partner, Sanofi, right? But
Yeah.
Regeneron shares in the profit.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Sanofi records the sales, but in Q1 alone, Regeneron's share of profits from the commercialization of antibodies, which is driven primarily by Dupixent, was over $1.45 billion.
Wow. But I'm looking at their pipeline updates for Dupixent, and I'm genuinely a little confused. They note it just got FDA and European Commission approval for young children with chronic spontaneous urticaria, which is a severe form of hives. And then right below that, it says it became the first and only medicine approved for allergic fungal rhinosinusitis. How does one single drug treat a skin condition and, like, a severe fungal sinus infection?
I know, it seems like a miracle drug until you understand the underlying mechanism. Dupixent isn't a skin drug or a sinus drug. It's actually a pathway blocker.
A pathway blocker.
Yeah, specifically, it targets the pathways of something called type 2 inflammation. Think of type 2 inflammation as a specific alarm system in your immune system. In some people, that alarm just gets stuck in the on position, causing the body to totally overreact. If that overreaction happens in the skin, you get severe hives or eczema. If it happens in the airways, you get asthma or rhinosinusitis.
Oh, I see. So instead of treating the symptoms locally in the skin or the nose, Dupixent goes straight to the breaker box and turns off that specific alarm.
That is the perfect way to visualize it, yes. And because type 2 inflammation is the root cause of so many different diseases, Regeneron essentially has an entire pipeline wrapped up in this one single product.
That makes a lot of sense. But while Dupixent is soaring and funding all that R&D, we have to talk about the other massive pillar of their business, the ophthalmology portfolio, specifically EYLEA. Because this is where the numbers tell a very tense story of transition.
Yeah, tense is a good word for it.
Right. If we look at the U.S. market, Sales of their newer version, EYLEA HD, surged 52% to $468 million. But the older, standard EYLEA 2 milligram version saw its U.S. sales drop by 36%, down to $473 million.
Hmm.
So when you combine the two, the total U.S. EYLEA franchise actually shrank by 10% to $941 million.
It is a really delicate balancing act. They are essentially cannibalizing their own flagship product to save the overall franchise.
It totally makes me think of an airline swapping out its planes right on the tarmac, like EYLEA, the old reliable 747, right? It's been flying passengers for years, making a ton of money, but suddenly budget airlines are pulling up right next to it at the gate.
I love that analogy.
Right, so Regeneron has to rush all their passengers, which are the patients and the prescribing doctors, onto their brand new, faster jet EYLEA HD before those passengers realize the budget flights are cheaper.
Exactly. And the urgency to get passengers onto that new jet comes down to the patient experience. EYLEA HD isn't just like a marketing rebrand. It's a higher 8 milligram dose that recently gained FDA approval for extended dosing intervals of up to 20 weeks. That's 5 months for patients with wet, age-related macular degeneration and diabetic macular edema.
I mean, getting an injection directly into your eye is not exactly a fun Tuesday.
Either.
The standard EYLEA requires injections every month or two, so stretching that out to almost half a year between injections is a massive quality of life win for a patient.
It fundamentally changes the treatment burden, but, from a business perspective, that 20-week interval is a necessary defensive mode. Because those budget airlines you mentioned, they are not just theoretical anymore. The U.S. regulatory exclusivity for the original EYLEA expired in May of 2024.
Wow, so the gates are open?
The starting gun fired, and the competitors have arrived in the form of biosimilars.
Okay, let's define that term for the listener, because we hear generic drug all the time, right? But the filings specifically use the word biosimilar. Why aren't these budget competitors just called generics?
It all comes down to the complexity of the manufacturing. A traditional drug, like, say, aspirin, is a simple chemical compound. It's really easy to reverse engineer and copy exactly. If aspirin is a bicycle, a biologic drug like EYLEA is a space shuttle.
A space shuttle, okay.
Yeah, biologics are highly complex molecules grown from living cells. You literally cannot copy them perfectly. So competitors create a biosimilar, a drug that is highly similar and has no clinically meaningful differences from the original, but it's not an exact chemical replica.
And because they didn't have to spend billions of dollars inventing that space shuttle from scratch, they can sell their version for significantly less. And the sources note that Amgen's biosimilar, Pavblu, has already launched in the United States.
Right. The competition is officially in the market, eating into that original EYLEA market share. And Regeneron is actively fighting this on multiple legal fronts just to buy themselves time. For instance, they just secured a settlement with Samsung Bioepis, which delays Samsung's biosimilar launch in the U.S. until January 2027.
So they are buying time to get everyone onto the new EYLEA HD jet before the tarmac is completely flooded with cheaper alternatives to the old jet. But I have to push back on the financial reality of this.
Okay, go for it.
If the competition is this intense and their combined EYLEA franchise revenue is dropping 10%, how is Regeneron managing to keep their gross margins at 76%? I mean, I know it dropped from 81% a year ago, but keeping 76% of your revenue as gross profit still seems incredibly high for a company taking a hit from cheaper competitors. Aren't they bleeding cash somewhere?
Your intuition is spot on there. And the answer to why that margin dropped from 81 to 76% is actually hidden deep in the footnotes of the 10Q filing. It wasn't primarily the competitors pushing prices down. Regeneron actually experienced a temporary interruption in bulk manufacturing at their facility in Limerick, Ireland during the first quarter.
An interruption, like a full factory shutdown.
Yeah, due to unanticipated facility repairs. And see, when a biologic manufacturing plant halts production, you don't just lose time. You incur massive, unabsorbed manufacturing costs. You have highly specialized staff just standing by. You have machinery that requires constant maintenance even when it's idle, and in this case, inventory write-offs, because biologic materials can literally spoil.
Oh, wow.
So that temporary hiccup dragged down the GAAP gross margin significantly.
That is a wild example of the fragility of modern globalization. I mean, a leaky pipe or a broken centrifuge in a small town in Ireland instantly wipes 5% off the gross margin of a $3.6 billion behemoth in New York.
It really highlights how delicate biologic supply chains really are. Now, they did note that production resumed in the second quarter and that the interruption didn't impact patient availability, but it was a very expensive physical reality check for them.
Which brings us to perhaps the most fascinating part of these filings. Because supply chains are so fragile, companies will clearly go to extraordinary lengths to protect them. As we look at these SEC documents, there is a detailed section outlining April 2026 agreements with the U.S. government, specifically involving the current administration's TrumpRx platform. And, to be clear to you listening, we're strictly looking at the business mechanics here. We aren't taking political sides or endorsing any policies. We are purely extracting the cause and effect on Regeneron as a corporate entity.
And objectively speaking, the corporate implications of this agreement are massive.
Right.
First, Regeneron agreed to provide certain wholly owned products to the Medicaid program at or below what is called most favored nation pricing.
Which is a huge concession, right? I mean, historically, U.S. drug prices have been significantly higher than in Europe or Japan, essentially subsidizing global pharmaceutical R&D. So agreeing to benchmark their prices against the lowest prices paid by other developed nations is a major hit to their traditional pricing power.
Totally. They also agreed to participate in a direct purchasing platform, TrumpRx.gov, specifically for their cholesterol drug, Praluent, which allows eligible patients to bypass traditional pharmacy benefit managers entirely. But the centerpiece of this negotiation involves a drug called Otarmeni.
Here's where it gets really interesting. This is where I was genuinely stunned reading the filings. Regeneron agreed to provide their newly approved gene therapy, Otarmeni, for free in the United States. Free? How on earth does a for-profit biotech company justify giving away a brand new cutting-edge gene therapy to its shareholders?
Well, you have to look at the other side of the ledger. What is the value of certainty? In exchange for these pricing concessions and the free gene therapy, Regeneron secured an exemption from Section 232 tariffs all the way through January 2029.
Okay, let's explain Section 232 tariffs, because that ties directly back to what we just talked about with the factory in Ireland.
Right. Section 232 tariffs are essentially import taxes the government can levy on goods deemed critical to national security. Biopharma relies heavily on importing raw materials, specialized components, and as we saw, sometimes finished products across international borders. By securing a guaranteed exemption from these tariffs until 2029, Regeneron basically protects its profit margins from unpredictable taxes.
So they are trading the potential revenue of this new gene therapy for absolute supply chain security.
Exactly. And furthermore, they secured immunity from future pricing mandates. By making this bespoke agreement right now, Regeneron isolates itself from ongoing legislative unpredictability. They know exactly what their operating costs and regulatory burdens will look like for the next 3 years. They exchange short-term pricing power for long-term stability.
It is a very calculated barter system, but it begs the question, just how significant is the science they are actually giving away? Because gene therapy is a buzzword that gets thrown around a lot, but this application is incredibly specific.
Oh, the science is a massive milestone. Otarmeni, or Lunsatugene Parvec, was granted accelerated approval by the FDA. Regeneron actually utilized a priority review voucher for this drug.
And a priority review voucher is essentially a golden ticket in the biotech world. Companies can earn them by developing drugs for neglected diseases, or they can buy them from other companies, sometimes for over $100 million, right?
Oh yeah, they are highly sought after.
So when you play this voucher, you force the FDA to speed up their review timeline from the standard 10 months down to 6 months. You only use that golden ticket if you are incredibly confident in the science.
And their confidence was definitely justified. Otarmeni is the first and only in vivo gene therapy approved for severe to profound genetic hearing loss associated with variants in the OTOF gene.
The OTOF gene. Let's break down the mechanics of how this actually restores hearing.
So OTOF stands for otoferlin. This gene produces a protein that acts like a bridge. It allows the sensory cells in the inner ear to communicate with the auditory nerve. When a patient has a mutation in this gene, the ear physically receives sound perfectly fine, but the bridge is out. It literally cannot transmit the electrical signal to the brain.
Right.
So Otarmeni uses an adeno-associated virus as the delivery truck. They hollow out a harmless virus, pack it with a functional copy of the OTOF gene, and inject it directly into the patient's ear cells.
So the virus infects the cell, but instead of making the person sick, it drops off the correct genetic code to rebuild the bridge. I mean, that is science fiction happening in real time.
It really is. And by providing this for free in the U.S., Regeneron isn't just making a concession. They are establishing themselves as a pioneer in the commercial and logistical rollout of genetic medicines. Delivering a fragile virus directly into the inner ear requires incredibly specialized training for doctors and complex cold chain logistics. They are building that infrastructure right now on the government's goodwill for future gene therapies down the line.
Wow, it proves they are constantly looking at the next frontier. But, clinical development is inherently risky. Not every swing is a home run, and the filings don't hide their setbacks, particularly in their oncology pipeline.
No, they don't. The discipline required in oncology research is ruthless. Regeneron has a LG3 antibody called fianlimab. The sources note that its phase 3 trial for adjuvant melanoma passed a review by an independent data monitoring committee and is continuing as planned.
Let's define adjuvant versus what happened with their other trial. Adjuvant means they are giving the drug to patients who have already had their tumors surgically removed, right? To clean up any microscopic cancer cells and prevent from coming back.
Correct. In that setting, the drug is showing promise. However, the company disclosed that phase 2 data evaluating the very same drug, fianlimab, in first-line advanced non-small cell lung cancer did not support moving forward to phase 3.
And first-line advanced means the cancer has already spread widely, and this would be the very first treatment the patient receives.
Right. And in that more advanced aggressive setting, the data simply wasn't strong enough. They looked at the numbers and immediately cut their losses. You cannot let ego drive biopharma. You have to kill the programs that don't show clear, overwhelming efficacy quickly so you can reallocate your capital to the ones that do.
So what does this all mean for the bigger picture of this company? I mean, we've covered a staggering amount of ground today. A $3.6 billion revenue quarter driven by Dupixent blocking inflammation pathways. A massive effort to upgrade patients to EYLEA HD before biosimilars flood the market. A factory repair in Ireland proving the fragility of global supply chains. And, of course, an unprecedented barter agreement with the federal government involving free gene therapy.
Yet knowledge is most valuable when we can synthesize all these moving parts into a single narrative. The big picture is that Regeneron is navigating a profound inflection point, but they're doing it from a position of strength. And we know this because they aren't hoarding cash out of fear. The filings reveal they authorized a new $3 billion share repurchase program.
Which is the ultimate signal of internal confidence. You don't authorize a $3 billion stock buyback if you believe the biosimilars are going to sink your core franchise.
Exactly. They believe in their defensive moat. They are pushing the boundaries of genetic medicine with Otarmeni. They're defending their market share with EYLEA HD. And they are aggressively reshaping the regulatory environment by sitting down directly with the federal government. They're controlling their own variables in an inherently unpredictable industry.
It is a masterclass in strategic risk management. And that brings us to a provocative thought we want to leave you with today. We've seen Regeneron pioneer this entirely new model of corporate statecraft, trading-free, cutting-edge gene therapies, and most favored nation pricing for tariff relief and total regulatory certainty until 2029.
It really forces us to ask, is this just a one-off negotiation, or have we just witnessed the birth of a new standard?
Exactly. Will this bespoke barter system between big pharma and the federal government become the necessary blueprint for biotech survival? If other pharmaceutical giants want to protect their fragile global supply chains from tariffs, are they going to have to start giving away their newest innovations for free, too?
If that becomes the norm, it will completely redefine the economics and the accessibility of healthcare innovation for the next decade.
Definitely something for you to mull over.
Yeah.
We started today talking about the contradiction of record profits mixed with massive product giveaways and factory shutdowns. But when you unpack the actual mechanics, you realize it isn't a contradiction at all. It is simply what it takes to keep the plane flying while you install a much faster engine. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Catch you next time.